Almost anyone familiar with the Fifth Commandment assumes they already understand its primary purpose. It is the classic verse we reflexively quote at a misbehaving child: "Honor your father and your mother." In our modern lexicon, we translate this simply as, "Do what you are told, obey your parents, tidy up your room, respect your elders, and above all, do not talk back." We instinctively file it away in the same mental drawer as school rules, table manners, and bedtime routines. We view it as a top-down directive, aimed at the young, the small, and those who require constant managing, essentially, a behavioral rule for children. However, before we go any further, it is crucial to recognize exactly who was standing at the foot of Mount Sinai when this edict was delivered. The crowd gathered there was not a restless congregation of toddlers. It was a nation of fully grown adults. These were men and women who had children of their own, and crucially, many of them had parents who were getting older, growing frail, and becoming increasingly difficult to care for. When God handed down this commandment, His primary audience was not a rebellious 5-year-old being scolded to obey. It was a 40-year-old adult being instructed on how to treat their aging mother living in the family tent. Once you grasp that historical context, the comfortable, familiar reading begins to unravel. This commandment, which we so often treat as a strict rule for the powerless, was originally spoken to the powerful, to those possessing the strength, the financial means, and the physical ability to simply walk away. Furthermore, the original Hebrew word translated as honor is likely not the word you would expect. It is completely different from the word for obey. Instead, it is a strangely physical, almost tactile term. Once you uncover its literal meaning, this commandment ceases to be about children entirely. It transforms into one of the most deeply searching, quietly demanding things God has ever asked of grown adults. Let us carefully weigh this word. The Hebrew term is Kaved, or Kaved, and its root does not mean to respect, to comply, or to be polite. It literally means to be heavy, to be weighty, to possess mass, to carry weight, or to be substantial. Throughout the Hebrew Bible, wherever this 3-letter root, KBD, appears, it is fundamentally tied to the concept of physical or metaphorical weight. For instance, when the elderly priest Eli is described in the book of Samuel as old and heavy, this exact word is used. He was physically Kaved, weighed down by the sheer mass of his own body. When Pharaoh hardens his heart in the book of Exodus, the text frequently notes that his heart became Kaved, heavy, possessing too much dense mass to be moved by empathy or reason. When the devastating famine in Genesis strikes, it is described as a Kaved, famine, a weighty, oppressive hunger that presses down heavily upon the land. Long before this root describes abstract concepts of honor, it is literally about heaviness. Therefore, when the Fifth Commandment instructs you to Kaved, your father and mother, the literal sense lurking beneath the polite English translation is this: give them weight, make them heavy in your life. Treat them as substantial beings who carry measurable mass, as people whose very presence exerts a gravitational pull on your choices. First and foremost, this is not a command about superficial behavior. It is a profound command about weight. It is about how much a person counts, how deeply they register in your consciousness, and how much they pull on your daily life. And that is a vastly different instruction from merely demanding obedience. After all, you can easily obey someone you consider entirely weightless. Soldiers routinely obey orders from officers they secretly despise. Employees comply with managers they find utterly ridiculous. Obedience can run smoothly on nothing but fear or ingrained habit, attaching absolutely no personal weight to the authority figure. But you cannot give someone genuine weight and remain indifferent to them. 2. Kaved. A person is to make a deliberate, conscious decision that they matter. It means acknowledging that they are heavy enough to bend the trajectory of your life around them, heavy enough to cause inconvenience, and heavy enough that you must arrange your own schedule and priorities in relation to theirs. The commandment is not asking for mere compliance. It is demanding gravity. You can feel exactly how deliberate this linguistic choice is when you examine the word the Bible uses for the direct opposite of honoring your parents, because the text explicitly provides us with a mirror image. Just a few chapters later, nestled within the same body of law, lies a sobering decree: whoever curses his father or his mother shall be put to death. To modern ears, this sounds as though it is referring to verbally swearing at your parents or shouting profanities. However, the Hebrew word translated as curses in this passage is kalal. And kalal does not mean to hurl bad words. It derives from the root qll, which translates to being light, being trivial, or possessing absolutely no weight. Kalal is the exact, precise opposite of kaved. One means to deliberately make heavy, the other means to render entirely light. Therefore, in the actual vocabulary of the Torah, the two opposing poles of how you can treat your parents are not honor and insult. They are heavy and light. To honor your father and mother is to grant them weight. To curse them, the ultimate capital crime, the action positioned at the furthest, darkest end of the moral scale, is to make them light. It is to treat them as trivial, as weightless, as individuals who simply do not count for anything anymore. The sin that the Bible takes most seriously in this context is not explosive rage. It is callous dismissal. It is the indifferent shrug. It is treating the very people who gave you your life as though they weigh absolutely nothing. This revelation completely reframes the entire commandment. The vast majority of us will never curse our parents in the traditional, shouting sense of the word. But treating them as light, viewing them as a bothersome obligation to be minimized, a weightless nuisance to be managed quickly and moved past, is a temptation available to all of us every single day. And that casual dismissal is the exact offense this commandment was engineered to forbid. The true opposite of honor is not hatred, it is lightness. Now, let us follow this same linguistic route one step further, because it leads somewhere that should stop us in our tracks. That exact same KBD root, the heaviness root, produces one of the most profoundly important words in the entire Hebrew Bible. Kavod. Kavod is usually translated into English as glory. It is the glory of God. It is the kavod that intensely fills the temple, the sheer weight of cloud and fire that settles upon Mount Sinai, the overwhelming presence that Moses begs to see, only to be told that no living mortal can survive the full, unfiltered sight of it. That majestic word, glory, is intrinsically a weight word. At its core, God's glory is God's heaviness. It is the sheer, unbearable substance of the divine, the absolute density of his presence, and the undeniable fact that he is more real, more solid, and more weighty than anything else in existence. When the Bible attempts to articulate the greatest, most awe-inspiring attribute of God, the thing that fills grand temples and drops prophets flat on their faces, it reaches for the concept of weight. Glory is, quite literally, weightiness. And astonishingly, the honor you are commanded to bestow upon your parents is a localized, domestic form of that very same word. No, you are not asked to give them glory in the divine sense. That eternal weight belongs to God alone. But you are commanded, using the very same linguistic root, to give them weight, to allow them to be heavy in your life. The commandment quietly borrows the exalted vocabulary of God's own glorious presence and hands a small, deeply human portion of it over to the two ordinary, aging people who raised you. That is a staggering reality to notice. The term the universe reserves for the majestic presence of God is the exact same term the family unit is instructed to use for how a child must treat a parent. They are not equal in degree, not even close, but they are the exact same kind of thing. It is about granting weight, acknowledging substance, and stubbornly refusing to let someone become light. This is precisely where the popular, modern reading of the text must be corrected. Gently, perhaps, but quite firmly, because it matters enormously for what this commandment actually requires of us. Honor is simply not the same as obedience. They are entirely different words, and the Bible utilizes both without ever confusing them. When Scripture wants to instruct someone to obey, it uses the word shama, meaning to hear, to listen deeply, and to act upon what you have heard. It is the primary verb in the great command, "Hear, O Israel." Furthermore, when the Bible specifically wants children to obey their parents in a strict sense, it is perfectly capable of saying so clearly. When the Apostle Paul writes to the households in Ephesus, he explicitly tells children to obey their parents, employing the Greek word hypakoa, which means to listen under or to submit. That is a very real, necessary instruction, and it has its specific place, and its place is childhood. But the fifth commandment does not tell you to shama your parents. It explicitly tells you to kaved them. It does not demand blind obedience. It demands that you give them weight. And that distinction is the entire point, because obedience comes with a natural expiration date, while weight does not. A 12-year-old rightly obeys his parents. A 50-year-old generally does not, nor should he. A grown adult who still simply defers and obeys his mother and father in every major life decision has not successfully kept the commandment. He has merely failed to grow up. Obedience is designed for that vulnerable season of life, when your parents know more than you do, and bear full responsibility for your well-being. Eventually, that season ends. But the profound command to give them weight never ends. It tracks with the relationship all the way up, transitioning from the dependent child who obeys to the independent adult who no longer does, yet who still consistently gives weight. This is precisely why the commandment was originally spoken to grown adults. It is not primarily focused on the years when your parents physically and emotionally tower over you. It is deeply concerned with the years when they no longer do. It is for the season when you possess the money and they do not. When you have the physical strength and they do not. When you could, if you so chose, treat them as utterly weightless, and no earthly authority could stop you. That pivotal moment is exactly what the commandment is aiming at. Honor is what obedience matures into, when you are no longer obligated to obey. And this concept lands heavily on a truth that the ancient world understood viscerally, yet the modern world has done everything in its power to desperately hide from itself. People get lighter as they age. This is not necessarily true physically. Often the opposite occurs, but they grow lighter in a social sense. They lose mass in the terrible, cold arithmetic by which our society assigns human value. A person's weight, in the eyes of the modern world, almost exclusively tracks with their visible usefulness, what they can produce, what assets they control, and what tangible benefits they can still offer you. Measured by that utilitarian scale, the elderly lose weight steadily, year over year. They stop earning a paycheck. They stop making the big decisions. They cease being consulted on important matters. They start repeating their stories. They become, in the unforgiving ledger of a culture that worships productivity, lighter and lighter, until, at the very end, an entire human life can be treated as almost completely weightless. They become a logistical problem to be solved, a room in a care facility to be visited occasionally, a burden to be efficiently managed. And it is into this exact cultural drift that the fifth commandment firmly plants its foot. Kaved. Give them weight. Do this precisely when the surrounding world is ruthlessly stripping their weight away. Honor your father and your mother is not a syrupy, sentimental line about feeling warm affection for the people who raised you when you were small and they were vibrant. It is a rigorous command about your actions when they are old and weak, and the natural gravity of the relationship has completely reversed. It applies when they desperately need you in the exact way you once needed them, and when carrying their burdens is deeply inconvenient. It speaks to the time when it would be so incredibly easy and entirely socially acceptable to let them quietly fade into lightness. The commandment stands as a bulwark against this, declaring, "Do not. No matter what the world's ledger claims, you must keep them heavy. You must intentionally give them the weight that the world is trying to take away." Furthermore, the Bible adamantly refuses to let this concept remain abstract. It refuses to let honor devolve into a warm, fleeting feeling in your chest, while your hands remain idle doing nothing. There is a striking scene in the 7th chapter of Mark, where Jesus takes this exact commandment and makes it brutally, uncomfortably concrete. A group of religious leaders approaches Jesus, and in the midst of their theological exchange, he accuses them of a highly specific and damning hypocrisy. They had developed a clever legal loophole. A man could take the money or financial resources that would otherwise be required to support his aging parents, and he could officially declare those funds Korban, a term meaning dedicated to God or set apart as a sacred offering. Once the money was labeled Korban, the religious reasoning dictated that it was strictly off-limits for ordinary, earthly use. It was deemed holy, which conveniently meant it could no longer be spent on the medical care or housing of his mother and father. He got to retain control of his resources, bask in the public religious credit for his devout dedication, and entirely escape the expensive, grinding burden of actually caring for his parents, all while looking infinitely more righteous than his peers. Jesus is absolutely savage in his critique of this practice. He tells them point blank that they have weaponized their own traditions to successfully nullify the very commandment of God. And the specific commandment he names is, "Honor your father and your mother." Pay close attention to what this interaction reveals about the true definition of honor. Jesus explicitly treats the failure to financially support aging parents as a direct, grievous violation of Kaved. In his authoritative reading, to honor your parents is concretely choosing to spend on them. It means allowing them to be a heavy presence on your calendar, your bank account, and your personal energy reserves. The free Korban trick was merely an ancient loophole for making parents light while dressing the betrayal up as holiness. And Jesus viciously tears the pious mask right off of it. Honor, he makes abundantly clear, is not a sentimental feeling vibrating in your chest. It is measurable weight that your hands must carry. It manifests tangibly as given time, spent money, embraced inconvenience, and dedicated care. If it lacks these things, it simply isn't honor, it is just Korban, disguised with a nicer vocabulary. As a quick side note before we make the final turn, if this kind of study, the sort that takes a verse you thought you completely understood and turns it over until the raw Hebrew truth shines through, is useful to you, subscribing genuinely helps more than you would guess. That is all. Now, back to the weight. Near the very end of the Old Testament, there is a profound moment where God picks up this exact fifth commandment and applies it directly to himself. It reveals precisely how seriously heaven regards this "wait" word. The prophet Malachi opens his book with God directly confronting a cynical nation of priests who are merely going through the religious motions. They are tossing God their scraps and leftovers, offering him their blind, lame, and diseased animals, practicing a bare minimum, transactional religion. And the core argument God presents to them begins right within the structure of the family. A son honors his father, he states, using Kaved, the wait word, and a servant honors his master. Then God pivots and asks a piercing question. If then I am a father, where is my honor? Where is my weight? God takes the fifth commandment, this seemingly ordinary domestic instruction regarding aging parents, and elevates it as the ultimate template for what is rightfully owed to him. The primary complaint against these priests is not that they actively hate God. His grievance is that they have made him light. They are treating the Almighty Creator in the exact same manner a careless, self-absorbed adult treats an aging, burdensome parent, with an indifferent shrug, with leftover time, with the absolute bare minimum of effort, and with a weightless, dismissive nod. And God specifically identifies this treatment as a profound wound. effectively saying, "You have made me light." This quietly but powerfully reveals that the way you treat your earthly parents and the way you treat God are, in the Bible's vocabulary, driven by the exact same verb. Kaved operates on a two-way street. It runs vertically upward to the Father in heaven, and it runs horizontally back to the earthly father and mother who raised you. It is the flexing of the exact same spiritual muscle. The individual who has learned how to grant genuine weight to the weak, aging, and no longer useful people sitting at his own dining table is actively learning the precise attitude God demands for himself. Conversely, Malachi suggests that the person who has mastered the cruel art of the weightless nod at home will inevitably offer that very same empty gesture to God. It is also deeply significant that this is the only one of the 10 Commandments that comes with a specific promise attached to it. However, this promise is almost universally misread, making it worth our time to slow down and examine it closely. The text reads, "Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land the Lord your God is giving you." Many people interpret this as a strictly personal transaction. They assume it means, honor your parents, and you personally are guaranteed to live a very long time. It is read as a kind of divine life insurance policy, trading good behavior for guaranteed longevity. That interpretation runs into insurmountable trouble almost immediately, because history and daily life show us that plenty of people who deeply and beautifully honored their parents still died tragically young. And the Bible is fully aware of this reality. But look closer at what the promise actually states. It does not promise that you as an individual will live long. It promises that your days may be long. In the land. The land represents the shared place, the collective nation, the broader society. The promise is fundamentally communal, long before it is ever personal. When read through this lens, it ceases to be a magic reward and reveals itself as an ironclad sociological law. A society that faithfully keeps its commandment to give weight to its elderly, a culture that actively shoulders the burden of its aging, its weak, and its no longer productive members rather than discarding them, is a society built to endure. Conversely, a society that makes its old people light, that ruthlessly treats the weak as disposable the very moment they stop producing economic value, is a society actively sawing through the branch upon which it sits. Because every single vital, productive person in that society is eventually going to grow old. The command to honor parents is the vital connective thread that holds successive generations together. Pull that thread, and the entire social fabric inevitably unravels. Because a culture that callously discards the generation on its way out the door is actively instructing the next generation on exactly how they, too, should be discarded when their time comes. Long life in the land is not a shiny prize handed out to well-behaved children. It is the natural, inevitable fruit of a people who stubbornly refuse to let anyone within their borders become weightless. Honor the old, and the society that honors them secures its own future. Discard them, and you have merely taught your own children the precise method by which to discard you. Now, intellectual and spiritual honesty requires us to address a very hard, painful question here. This commandment has been tragically misused, and any study that pretended otherwise would not be worth trusting. Does giving weight mean that absolutely every parent, regardless of what heinous things they may have done, is owed unconditional obedience and unlimited access to your life? Does honor dictate that a person must passively submit to a parent who severely abused them? Must they repeatedly expose themselves, or their own vulnerable children, to someone who is demonstrably dangerous? Are we required to play make-believe and pretend that a cruel, destructive history simply did not happen? Here, the absolute precision of the original Hebrew is incredibly helpful, even liberating, because the commandment explicitly says, Kaved, not Shama. It says, give weight. It emphatically does not say, obey without limit, and it certainly does not say, pretend. Honor and obedience are distinct words, and the Bible never collapses them into one another. You can absolutely give something weight while simultaneously keeping a safe distance from it. In fact, extreme weight and extreme distance very frequently go hand in hand. The heaviest, most intensely impactful things in our lives are often the very things we have had to step far back from, simply in order to survive them. So, honoring a parent who genuinely harmed you does not mean foolishly handing them the power to continue harming you. It simply cannot mean that. The exact same scripture that commands you to honor your parents also speaks extensively and fiercely about protecting the vulnerable from harm. And God does not command people to march back into an active war zone of abuse and label it obedience. What honor can mean in those shattered, dark places is simply refusing to let even a profoundly failed parent become completely weightless to you. It means refusing to pretend that they did not matter. It means rejecting the false narrative that they were nothing, and instead carrying the heavy reality of what actually happened with brutal honesty, rather than casually shrugging the trauma off into the void. Sometimes, the most honest, deeply authentic form of honor available to a survivor is simply to say, "You mattered. You possessed immense gravity in my life. Your devastating failures were incredibly heavy, precisely because you were supposed to be heavy in a beautiful, nurturing way, and you were not." Acknowledging that painful weight is not the same thing as relational reconciliation, nor is it the same thing as granting access, and the Bible does not forcefully mandate those things in the face of unrepentant danger. Weight is not synonymous with physical proximity. You are fully permitted to honor the gravity of a situation from a very safe distance. I want to be crystal clear about this nuance, because this commandment has frequently been wielded as a spiritual whip against the hurting, and it was never, ever meant to be a weapon. So, it is time to set down the child's version of this verse. Discard the tidy your room interpretation, because in truth, it was never primarily meant for children at all. It is a mandate meant for you, right now, as an adult, dealing with the actual, flawed parents you have. It is for those parents who are steadily getting older, while you are steadily getting busier. The ones whose weekly phone calls have slowly morphed into a chore, just another item to be checked off a grueling list. The ones who endlessly repeat the same stories. The ones who increasingly need simple things explained to them twice. The people who are, slowly but surely, in the world's cold arithmetic, becoming lighter, less useful, less socially impressive, and far less able to do anything tangible for you than they once were. The Fifth Commandment is aimed squarely at that exact intersection, at that subtle, creeping drift you can feel happening in your own heart. It targets that quiet, gravitational loosening whereby a parent becomes, year over year, just a little bit easier to postpone. And it asks one profound thing: give them weight, not obedience. You are a grown adult, and that particular season is securely behind you. Not pretense, you are fully allowed to be honest about exactly who they were and who they are today. But wait. Let them remain heavy in your life. Let them be deeply inconvenient. Let caring for them cost you your precious time, your hard-earned money, and your dwindling energy, in the exact same way that you once cost them absolutely everything. Remember the time when you were the utterly weightless one, and they were the giants who decided that you mattered anyway. There was a long season where you could do absolutely nothing, produce nothing, and contribute nothing to society. Yet they bestowed immense weight upon you regardless. They willingly arranged their entire complex adult lives around a tiny, helpless creature that did nothing but cry and consume. True honor is simply that exact same beautiful gift, running back in the opposite direction at the very end of life. Because, ultimately, that is what the weight word is fiercely protecting. It is guarding the sacred truth that a human being's intrinsic worth was never, ever tied to their societal usefulness. The secular world will always attempt to weigh people strictly by what they can produce. And when measured by that cruel scale, everyone, without exception, eventually goes light. The Fifth Commandment violently rejects that scale. It declares that a mother is heavy simply because she is your mother, not because she is still useful to your ambitions. It insists that a father possesses unyielding gravity simply because he is your father, not because he still has any resources left to offer you. Honor is the radical, daily decision to continue weighing people by exactly who they are, precisely when the rest of the world has started weighing them by what they can still do, and choosing, every single time, to come down on the side of who they are. So, the ancient commandment we always assumed was just a tool for getting rowdy children to behave turns out to be the ultimate test of our humanity. It is about whether we will allow the very people who originally gave us our weight to slowly become weightless to us. And it commands us, using the exact same majestic word it uses for the very glory of God, to never let that happen. To honor your father and mother is not to obey them blindly forever. It is to ensure, with everything in you, that they never become light. May the God whose very glory is defined by weight, and who has never, not even for a single moment, treated your life as light, grant you the profound strength to carry those who once carried you, gently, honestly, and all the way to the very end. God bless you.